Welcome back to the High Court Report. It's the day before Thanksgiving, which makes this the perfect time for a different kind of episode. Today, I want to tell you a story, how preparing for a hearing led to this podcast. Here's what I've learned. Whether you're a Supreme Court advocate, an architect discussing plans, a teacher explaining geometry, a doctor discussing treatment options, or a parent giving directions, we all share the same challenge, getting our audience to understand and follow. After 12 years of litigation, I discovered something that changed how I got my audience, a judge, to understand a complex topic, which ultimately launched this podcast. Let me take you back to fall 2021. I'm at my desk staring out the window. I see leaves changing colors from lush green to autumn orange. I'm thinking about my first court hearing in over a year. It's post-COVID and courts finally reopened. I represent a client embroiled in heated litigation. The facts? Complex. The law? Complex. And the judge? He cuts sharp. But even a smart judge still needs you to make it easy for them. If this judge didn't follow the bouncing ball, I lost. Playing out the hearing in my head, I rack my brain for every angle. I replay how my opening statement will go. Will I even get an opening statement? How should I answer his questions? How should I push back? How should I direct the judge to the briefs when I feel like something is written better in the briefs than I can convey orally? I remember something from law school, the basics of oral advocacy. Then I think, who does oral advocacy better than anyone? Supreme Court advocates. As I prepare for this hearing, I decide to listen to Supreme Court oral arguments. Not for the legal issues, but for the advocacy. How do the lawyers structure their openings? How do they handle unfavorable questions? How do they disagree without sounding defensive or disagreeable? I pull up the Supreme Court website. It disappoints. It's clunky, hard to navigate, especially on a phone. But I find arguments and listen. I notice things. I notice how certain advocates answer unfavorable questions directly and then swiftly pivot to a favorable point. I notice lawyers giving three-part answers. Justice Sotomayor, 3 points. First, second, third. I notice how they disagree and correct when necessary. I notice how the best advocates never evade the justice's questions. They give a short answer, even if it means answering unfavorably, but then they explain why this unfavorable answer doesn't spell doom. My hearing went incredibly well. The Supreme Court oral advocacy preparation helped immensely. I was able to adeptly answer the judge's questions, answer unfavorable questions, take what the opposing lawyer said and spin them to my advantage, and the judge ruled in our favor. My colleagues praised my performance. But more than that, I got hooked. The arguments fascinated me. The advocates performed at the top of their game. And I learned something every time I listened. Fascinated by this discovery, I start to dive more deeply into oral arguments. I listen to arguments completely outside of my practice area: IP, immigration, criminal law. And I discovered podcast versions of these arguments, which was perfect. I could listen while walking, driving, at the gym. I didn't need to navigate the Supreme Court's clunky website. But here's what I didn't expect. The platforms presented serious gaps. They updated infrequently, they lacked show notes, chapters, and didn't identify the lawyers arguing a case. I see a case caption, Edison v. Public Service Commission. Okay, what does that cover? No idea. Does it involve utilities? Free speech? Wrongful termination? I have no idea. I find myself listening in a vacuum, struggling to grasp the key facts and legal issues, or Googling case details mid-walk, just to figure out basic information. I also wanted to know the advocates. I knew the justices' voices, but not the lawyers who argued the cases. Consuming this content more regularly, the gaps became impossible to ignore, and an idea started to form. Fast forward to early 2025, actually March, early April sometime. The Supreme Court term is winding down, and on a whim, I decide to see what it would take to make my own podcast with the features I wanted when I listened. Taking a leap, I launched the High Court Report in April with basic oral argument hosting and contextual show notes. I also listed the advocates in the show notes. It started under the name SCOTUS Oral Arguments. Catchy, right? But then the Supreme Court began releasing opinions. April through June always brings a rush at the Supreme Court. Big decisions drop, sometimes multiple per day. And during this period, on a few occasions, there were 5 or 6 opinions that dropped on the same day. And as I started to read the opinions, I realized another gap existed. News outlets covered some, but not all opinions, and always through a lens. Liberal, conservative, pro-business, pro-labor, anti-this, pro-that. Everyone brought an angle. And there was almost no coverage in podcast format. What if someone just explained the opinion in podcast form? The legal reasoning, the implications, what the court said, not what people wanted it to say. I began experimenting with text-to-audio tools. My goal became clear. Take Supreme Court opinions, often spanning 50 to 100 pages, and turn them into something people can absorb on their commutes. I updated the name to SCOTUS Oral Arguments and Opinions. I began posting opinion summaries. The numbers climb. Enough to tell me people want this. Demand exists. And by this point, I had no marketing infrastructure whatsoever. I didn't promote anywhere. I had no social media accounts. And yet I still saw numbers increasing. With proof of concept in hand, the next steps became clear. Once opinion season finishes, I begin to add older arguments to the feed. Through vibe coding, I built a system to automatically download oral arguments and upload them to my podcast feed. I also start tracking emergency docket cases and the denials and the grants of certiorari. Especially in the emergency docket context, major action happens without oral argument, and nobody really makes that information accessible in podcast form. The podcast continues to grow all summer. In late summer, I received an email from a listener that changed everything. The emailer writes, "Thank you for making this accessible. This helps me stay informed." The emailer also gave me valuable feedback. At that point, I realized this project evolved beyond a side experiment. As the 2025 term approached, I asked myself, do you want to keep going? What do you want to do with this podcast? If you want to keep going, you need to take it even further. You need to do it right. To me, the answer was a no-brainer. I wanted to keep going. I wanted to do it right. As part of continual improvement, I decided to preview the upcoming cases. I wanted to give the audience the backstory behind each case instead of simply hosting oral arguments and summarizing opinions. Up until this point, the podcast ran anonymously. No host name, unhelpful title. And I said along the lines of wanting to do it right, it also meant that I needed to attach my name to it. And I needed to update the title and create a new name and logo. I did that. I received incredibly positive feedback, which then continued to validate my decisions. And that's what brings us here today. Now, I don't claim the title of Supreme Court scholar. I don't teach constitutional law. I never clerked for a Supreme Court judge. But as a lawyer, I litigate and I communicate. I've litigated for over 12 years. I can distill Supreme Court cases because I do this in my day job. I write briefs. I read briefs. I argue motions. I read court opinions. I try to figure out what opinions mean for my clients. This experience allows me to absorb and translate dense legalese. So, where do we go from here? Well, I want to build this into a one-stop shop for comprehensive Supreme Court coverage. It'll take time, resources, and constant evolution, but the mission will stay the same. Now, this Thanksgiving, reflecting on this journey fills me with overwhelming gratitude. I wanted to give thanks to a few people in particular. My incredible wife encourages me to pursue the podcast and supports me every step of the way. She's my sounding board and my confidant. My kids give me incredible joy and motivation. I always try to make them proud. My brother inspires me through his entrepreneurship. He teaches me to take leaps of faith and to not be afraid to try new things. I'm learning from him how to start a business from scratch. My mother, the sweetest, nicest person ever, taught me to give generously with my time. She helps me with everything from marketing and promotion to operations. She created the High Court Report website. She also helped create the social media pages and helps with my graphic and content. I'd be crazy to not tap into her. She won 3 Emmy Awards for a show she led. My father gives me advice and encouragement. He taught me how to lead. Even though I'm married with 2 incredible kids, I still routinely ask him for advice. He also devotes an impressive amount of time to mentorship and guidance. My father-in-law gives me advice and support on parenting and family. He has an incredible backstory. Born in India, raised part of the time in Qatar, he came to the United States shortly after college. His college credits didn't transfer, so he re-enrolled in school and graduated again, all while raising 2 amazing daughters and assimilating into an entirely new country. He now works for the Navy. Whenever I think things get tough, I think about him and what he endured. My godfather, Uncle Clay, and his wife Denise, they guide me through their successes, navigating the corporate world, networking, and recalibrating their careers. Denise worked in banking for many years, climbing the corporate ranks and shattering glass ceilings. My Uncle Clay successfully transitioned from lawyer to vice president at Temple University to president of an HBCU. He always wanted to lead a university. He followed his heart and made it happen. My godmother, Aunt Brenda, worked at the Justice Department for over 3 decades. She exposed me to the practice of law and broadened my network. She attends my kids' birthday parties and remains a constant source of guidance. My family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, too many to name, but you all mean so much to me. Thanks for your episode feedback and supporting me on this journey. My friends provide incredible support. They always show up for me as sources of joy, advice, and growth. Finally, my audience. You make it happen. When I started this project, I never knew where it would lead. You're the reason I keep going. Thank you so much for your continued support. As we enter Thanksgiving and the holidays, please take a moment to thank those who helped you become who you are today. Looking ahead, we've got oral arguments starting next week, major decisions coming down this term, and legal questions that will shape American law for decades. This podcast started with one hearing. I'm excited to grow with you to create comprehensive Supreme Court content. Stay tuned because this term is just getting started. That's it for today's episode. If you find this show valuable, please rate, share, subscribe, and follow. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and wherever you get your podcasts. Just search the High Court Report. Happy Thanksgiving. Talk to you all soon.